I'm at Ursinus College, which is just outside Philadelphia. I'm an academic dean here, and my home base is the philosophy department. Bernadette?
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Bernadette Ludwig. I am an associate professor of sociology, and I'm the director of civic engagement at Wagner College, which is in Staten Island, New York City.
Hello, good afternoon. I'm Mushkan Biman. I'm the Vice President for Academic Affairs and the Dean of the Faculty at Dominican University of California. We're located in the Bay Area. And in my former roles, I was both a faculty member in the English department and also the director of core curriculum and a number of signature programs.
Great, welcome everyone. Question, how many of you are currently at a full participation institution? As the CLDE defines it, an FPI. If you're a member of a full participation institution, raise your hand the old-fashioned way or by Zoom. Okay, how many of you are interested in becoming a full participation institution? I hope that's many of you. I'll start out with a few remarks about how we do things, what we're working on at my college on number 2 on the CLE framework about bridge building.
Sorry, Kelly, one more quick thing. Did we capture everyone? Because I'm trying to copy the questions here because we have one more. Maybe someone is like just curious.
Mm-hmm. I'm sorry, I didn't understand the question, Bernadette.
So there are some people who are basically who are novice or like very fully engaged, and then there are some people who are just popping in. And so I wanted to make sure we also were able to capture those people.
Okay, good. Let's watch for that as we talk. Number 2 of the 4 areas in the framework is about bridge building, and that's something we've been working on where I am. We're in Pennsylvania, a purple state, and because we're a purple state, especially in the last 10 years, we felt an increased urgency to help our students get a lot of practice at dialogue across difficult political issues. We've had some infrastructure to build on. For 25 years, we've had a first-year experience course that every student takes and almost every faculty member teaches with a shared syllabus. And that shared syllabus has texts from Plato to Darwin to John Stuart Mill. It now has Ta-Nehisi Coates. It has Michelle Alexander. All along, the idea has been to talk with students and have them talk with each other about big questions. And the idea has been to give them a lot of practice, a lot of reps at civil disagreement with each other. But again, in the last 10 years, that increased urgency about being in a purple state has led us to add more hot political topics. We have more on free speech. We have more on mass incarceration. We have more on things like immigration. The classrooms are small, 16 students, and we're working on that. As you know, working with students these days, it's when you get students practicing this kind of disagreement, some too hot and too angry. A problem I think a lot about here is sometimes it's too cold. Too many students will resist engaging in a dialogue about these issues, sometimes because they're afraid. Sometimes it strikes me because they think it's bad manners or bad etiquette to talk about immigration or religion and politics. They think it's bad manners to talk about that outside of their friends and family. So we spend a lot of time helping each other as teachers get those kind of conversations going. I want to emphasize that what we've been working on in the last 10 years has been relatively low cost and cheap in the following ways. Number one, adding the texts and the topics to our first year experience has been low cost. Second, we've used in-house faculty expertise to train ourselves continuously on how to have difficult dialogues. We have a faculty member in the communications department that happens to be an area she does research and work on, and she's doing, again, inexpensive, nice in-house regular training to help us work with our students in this way. Third, we meet for brown bag lunch every Monday and share experiences from the School of Hard Knocks about what's working in the classroom and what's not. I've often had a good idea from a colleague who's tried something just that morning. It's good to hear what's worked out. Those are all relatively inexpensive ways, again, building on a first-year experience course we already had. We're right now working on expanding and stretching that kind of thing into the sophomore, junior, senior year. And also relatively inexpensively, we've offered faculty mini grants, $500 mini grants to build civic engagement into their existing courses to sort of stretch this thing into later years. I'll stop there for now and turn it over to Bernadette.
Hi, so I am going to be talking about a little bit about the Wagner Plan. So the Wagner Plan has been around for 25 years. It predates my arrival here. And so one of the first things that students actually do is in the first year program, they are taking 2 content classes, and then they have something in between what we call a reflective tutorial. The 2 content classes are from 2 different disciplines, but they're around a particular kind of area. In the reflective tutorials or in the classes, the goal is for students to stop thinking in silos and basically be able to make those cross connections. In the reflective tutorials, students and faculty members engage in various experiential learning and community engagement and civic engagement. And the reason why I use a very broad term, it really depends on who is teaching it and what kind of availability we have and also the students have. I would just say that we are a Division I school. I know this is very hard to understand sometimes, that small liberal arts colleges can also be Division I schools, and that can also impacts the amount of, for example, community engagement a particular student can do because of the work that they need to be doing with their teams. We have stretched this into there's an interdisciplinary learning community where, again, students encountering faculty either co-teaching or having 2 classes taught together that are, again, from 2 different disciplines, and students in their senior capstones, all of them have to engage and participate or have to complete an internship. And again, have to sync in their classes. How is your internship related to their major? Obviously, this has been 25 years in the making. Lots of things have changed in between. Like if you think about just the type of phone you had 25 years ago, if you were old enough to have a phone back then, and what we can do today on a phone. And in terms of AI, where students are, Kelly already alluded to it, like what is not okay to talk about. So we are trying to re-envision and basically meeting the Gen Zs and the Gen As, I guess there are the alphas who are basically coming along. What can we do? What is it that students are really interested in? I think a lot of students are also thinking much more about career alignment. How can we speak the language that students then see the community and civic engagement is actually connected to future careers and endeavors that they want to undertake? And I'm going to pass it on.
Thank you, Bernadette. I'd like to tell you a little bit about what we've done at Dominican. We're a 130-year-old institution, and in looking at us and our time, excuse me, in the Bay Area, we've seen the institution evolve very much as small privates do, especially in the current higher ed landscape. So what's really sustained us over all of those transitions and changes as we've gone from being a faith-based women's institution and liberal arts college to a secular university that's offering degrees at the bachelor's, master's, and doctoral level, the guiding light for us has been the shared dedication to our focus on social impact and change that we create through civic learning. And in thinking about civic learning and engagement, we think both about a regional and a global community. In many ways, Dominican especially in the last decade, as we've transitioned from having first year experience and a common intellectual experience to other approaches, we've developed a multi-pronged way of going about it and making sure that all students not only have access to, but experience what we want them to experience there. So the first part of it is the Dominican experience. That's a curricular and co-curricular institutional signature program, and it draws on high impact practices. It includes integrative coaching and a team of them for students, but also community engagement, signature work, and a digital portfolio, all of these to deepen engagement and learning. Our second approach at about the same time, where we were doing this co-curricular and curricular and somewhat curricular work, where we were winning over faculty colleagues who would embed things in their courses, and some of it through grants and through learning communities. Our second approach was through the rearticulation of our institutional learning outcomes. And redoing those institutional learning outcomes, again, through a lot of small group and large group work, included all of Dominican. It included faculty, staff, students, everybody came together to design them. And then based on those, we started a program learning outcomes driven curricular revision of all our undergraduate programs. So all of our undergraduate programs were fully redesigned, and I mean completely redesigned, because we went from 3-unit courses to 4-unit courses, but streamlined the majors, went for depth rather than breadth, and it ensured that the programs were completely rethought and redesigned. And we built in, for example, an institutional learning outcome that included the practice of civic skills and social responsibility. And as we did that, one of the core places for that to come to life was in our intentional design of the core curriculum, because it has 9 categories, but we ended up developing categories such as civic knowledge and engagement, and examined life, which was more based in ethics and moral philosophy, and then purpose and meaning, which had to do with social justice and religion and community and all of that. As you can see from these categories, a lot of it had to do with who we were and where we were already doing things and doing them well. So it was about taking what sometimes felt like a boutique experience for students who could find the really good, important pieces and driving those up, to scale and making them come alive for all students. So in many ways, what we did ended up aligning really well with CLDE's goals, because for one, civic learning and engagement were built in and expected now of all students. So we had both an across the board and equitable participation. And doing them through a number of high impact practices meant that students from underserved communities would reap the greatest benefits in terms of persistence and graduation rates, which we also saw reflected in our graduation rates. We had students also engage with democracy structures and history, and they were looking at them both through practice and policy. A service learning course meant being one-on-one in the community and having individual experiences. Bringing that back to the classroom meant looking at policies, imagining how the student could actually create change and difference in the community, the small or larger one. And all of this was happening in a geographical area where through communities and community partners, our students could actually experience and see the inherent disparities, in access, in education, in health outcomes. All of those became very tangible. And then some of these HIPs included, these high impact practices, for example, included signature work where, again, you have this idea of collaboration and synthesizing learning across the core curriculum and liberal arts and the majors, and then problem solving key issues. And because it's signature work at the end, it also had the idea of students publicly sharing their expertise. And we created a university conference where all students at undergraduate and graduate level once a year present their culminating projects to peers, faculty, family members, or community members. And that also became part of making that even the learning and the combination of learning accessible to others, making it have value, and then by including it in our institutional repository, a lot of those culminating projects, they're also accessible worldwide. We have downloads across 200 countries, and people who see their thesis from their fourth year, their senior class, sort of go viral. So these are some of the ways through which Dominican has become a fully participating institution in CLD. Now I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Bernadette Ludwig, and she's going to share some possible questions and other ways of looking at this.
I'm trying to navigate like dropping things. Like I've never understood like how difficult this to be a moderator and copy and pasting. So I'm gonna paste it first into the chat. And then basically read it out loud. So using the CLDE framework as a diagnostic tool, where does your institution or organization have strengths? Where do you want to do more? For example, in students' purposeful civic engagement, democracy and levers for change, bridge building, and problem solving, practical experience in projects, career-related civic and ethical learning. And we just invite you to either put it in the chat or, it's not that many of us, so feel free to also just speak out loud.
So I'll comment here if it's all right. I'm Brian Mello. I'm the Associate Dean for Faculty Development at Muhlenberg College and Professor of Political Science. And so we did a curricular revision a couple years ago too. And there's elements to it that I'm trying to flesh out now based on this framework. We created an optional part of the curriculum known as micros. They're not quite micro credentials in the same way that like University of Texas goes through I forget whether they use Google or somebody else to get micro credentials for certain things, but the idea is to create collections of courses that students can kind of put together on their resume that build skills that aren't directly related to their major field of study or their major fields of study. And I'm trying to put together a micro around civic engagement based upon the CLDE goals and guidelines here. What I'm struggling with, we're at an early stage of it, is to try to figure out how much of those things should be practically skill-based experiences. So courses that really do involve like I teach a Scholars at Risk seminar where my students do advocacy on behalf of 3 scholars and connect with the Scholars at Risk network and those kinds of things. So how much should our experiences be rooted in those kinds of practical engagements, and how much of it should be rooted in sort of the knowledge types of things? And I looked at the learning goals. I was trying to go back and forth to the different people who were presenting and looking for learning goals for different groups. And I still don't yet have a good statement of like what are the civic skills that you'd want to be able to sort of highlight as you build out these kinds of things, like in a really, spelled out and practical way, right? So that's where I'm at in terms of trying to create a curricular mechanism at Muhlenberg. But our new curriculum looks awfully like Dominican's in the way in which we kind of redesign things. So it's got like 7 kind of core thematic questions, and they're broken down into different areas. We have 2 categories around engagement and social responsibility, though. One is race and power in the American experience, and one is global perspective. So that's kind of a modified version of what you have. But Yeah, so that's where I'm at, just trying to think through these things.
Um, I'm going to jump in. Brian, I think, I mean, maybe you can look at the website, or I can, if you contact me, I can send you the link. On Dominican side, under the institutional effectiveness, where we have the institutional learning outcomes, you have the broad goals, but then there is a lot of those broken out into the skills that we would look for in the class. So there is a lot more detailed iteration of that. One of the interesting things that we did, and a lot of times when people come to Dominican to do an external review, they're taken aback by it, is that we have this core curriculum with 9 categories, but we didn't actually create outcomes for the entire core curriculum. We created for each of those categories in alignment with the institutional learning outcomes, because we were running into this issue of having skills and a larger knowledge base. And if we had had one more layer on top of that, it would have made it even more difficult. We knew that we had knowledge areas, and then we wanted to practice the skills. I don't know quite what the answer to your question is, but what I do know is that in classes that I've taught, or classes that where I've been the learner, the information that the learning that I held on to for years afterwards, it's where I learned the concept and the skill together, where I learned the concept and used the skill to deepen it and embed it in my memory. I see so much content covered, and a semester later, a few months later, students don't recall it. I've been in classes where I don't recall what I did. And so the driver for me very often has been, what is going to deepen this and allow me to hold on to it and make it internal to who I am and my thinking?
And then maybe related to that, because I agree, like I'm thinking about like this sort of artificial distinction between content and skills a little bit, and that the sort of more efficacious way of doing it is kind of a blending of these rather than an artificial separation of them. So I'm thinking about Ursinus's great books program. So I'm wondering, how do you guys model that, or how do you implement that so that you're really developing what you want to develop, which is that kind of civic skill of creating these spaces for engagement through that core curriculum? So is there a lot of work that you do with faculty so that they, I mean, I almost think that I did an Aspen leadership seminar one year, and the way that works is you have all these great works, and you get 15 minutes on each one, and you're not allowed to talk about like context of them. You can only stick to the text. And so the facilitator literally just kind of facilitates an engagement with that text, and at 15 minutes, it's on to the next one. And you do that for 3 intensive days. But that's what I'm imagining you'd have to do in order to really develop these civic skills, is to create that environment where you're calling on everybody all at once. So if you can just go into more detail about how you work with faculty or develop faculty in that program.
First, back to your first question. I don't have the answer, but I wondered if you or Mojgan are looking at the NACE skill list. I've been told to get into that and look at it. It's on I've given it a cursory look. That's a place I'm going to look at more. To your second question, we train faculty who are teaching the course in a 2-week period before each semester. Those of us teaching get together, and we try to practice as a group what we want the students to do. So we talk about the text and try to train each other to teach them, at the same time modeling what we want the students to do. So that means we have to sometimes call each other out when somebody's playing expert historian about something, and that's not really what we're really going for. It's really hard. I'd like to say, after we've had this class 25 years, I'd like to say we've got it down now, but it's something we have to continually remind each other about. And again, as I mentioned, we have a specialist about difficult dialogues from our faculty come in, and that happens twice a year, every time we run this training, to remind us of some of the pitfalls and give us some ideas for how to make it work with students. But there's always the temptation that somebody will try to become a content expert about a text they weren't really trained in and show off to their students. And it's just a constant issue we have to remind each other about.
Do you
And I'm
pay,
happy to talk more, Brian, if, we run out of time today. If you want to chat, we're not far from each other anyway. And yeah,
do you pay faculty for those 2 weeks?
we do. They get a stipend. First timers, 2,000 for the 2 weeks. Repeat people, 500 to 1,000, depending on how much money's in the kitty. It's 2 hours every weekday. 5 weekdays, week 1, 5 weekdays, week 2.
I just want to come back to the NACE scale, like for a second. So this is something we have. Some of our gen ed classes basically now have key knowledge areas. So they have key knowledge areas and key skills attached to it, meaning that students, we're trying to convey to students that this is where you learn quantitative reasoning. This is where you learn intercultural understanding. And what I have done, and I think that this can be done, like I've done this in one of my, like actually in several of the capstone classes. I've done this in the civic engagement classes that I've taught, and I've done this in the sociology classes. I actually give students the NACE career readiness skills, and I basically ask them to assess themselves. And I find this actually really interesting because this goes back to, as Mojan said, where students come to think about where they acquire their skills, because I'm also asking where they're lacking the skills. They don't always refer necessarily to classes, but they also talk about like workshops that they have taken, the interaction they have had during their internships, leadership skills. Many of them cite being on a team. So I think that that's really interesting to understand. Like if you think about like co-curricular and like the academic side of the house, like how students are able, when you convey it to them, to actually think about it, to basically put it down on paper and have something to talk about. So I invite you to do this. This is very easy to do, and have students do the work more or less for you, but you can assess and understand where you feel like they will also talk about what their shortcomings are. We do have another question that I am getting ready to put right here. So the question is, thinking big picture, what would you ideally like to see as a powerful form of CLDE learning from your students?
And Bernadette, I need to apologize. I was getting my question ready and mine went up in the chat. So mine was supposed to come after yours.
And we're also tying up at, I believe, 4:40. Does that sound right?
Yes.
So whatever else, please do respond to Moishkan's question about the concrete action step you have in mind.
It says we have a hard stop at 5 or 7, if I'm reading this correctly. So we have a little bit of time to discuss this. But I think maybe some of these things are related. That something that you're basically thinking now, like whether this is like another big picture. What would you ideally like to see? Okay, Rooms at 5:05, so it was right there. Okay, and what I think it was very important, like when we met, to have like a call to action, like whether this is like, Brian, for you to be like, okay, Kelly, let's meet up. But maybe just think about what you would like to do next. I can't. I'm sorry, someone is speaking, but for some reason we cannot hear. Like can you hear? I cannot.
No, I'm afraid I can't hear you either, even though I'm very curious to know what you're saying. Yeah, the audio doesn't seem to be.
Can you put it in the chat? In the meantime, I'm going to read what Brian King basically said. I'm currently trying to build support for including a civic engagement requirement for our gen ed. I'm curious to hear more about this of you, because I think that there's, if you could elaborate, I think I wonder if some people have some suggestions around that.
I have a question on Brian's comment more than a suggestion. Some institutions will go for a requirement, and some instead go for something more like unavoidability or hard to avoid ability, where within different majors, it just sort of happens. I'm attracted to the latter because psychologically, students don't feel like it's a box they have to check. It's just something that majors like you, student A, do when you're an environmental science major or something like that.
Part of the
But I don't know that
approach that we're taking. Yeah. If you're familiar with writing across the curriculum,
Mhm.
we're taking that approach that there will be in all different departments and disciplines, courses that had civic engagement content, whether it be a STEM course or an English course or political science or anything else, and that those courses would be certified as having content there, and students just by taking those courses would hopefully get multiple doses of this as they go along.
Brian, I'm a little bit curious because what I've experienced is that we talk about civic learning, but when practitioners and faculty are creating their courses and working with that, there's quite a difference between civic knowledge, civic engagement,
Mhm.
and community engagement.
Yes.
And a lot of the discord and conflict also sometimes comes from disagreements on that, especially if they feel that there's going to be an assessment of their work or the students' work and their outcome based on definitions they might not agree on. So are you creating maybe varieties and allowing for different variations of that?
It's actually one of the two sort of stopping points that we're having some difficulty getting through right now. One is that our writing courses that use the same model are being assessed, and people don't want that additional responsibility. And so the assumption is that these would be assessed. And the other is that in order to have that foundational knowledge, like Brian was talking about, uh, they can't just be hands-on and do without understanding why. And some of the courses do phenomenally at getting students out into the community, but they don't have that foundational content that would need to be inserted into the course. And some students, some faculty rather, are resisting that.
Right. I mean, where I've seen a lot of the resistance too is, for example, courses that might get a student out into the community, but the classroom in-depth conceptual learning isn't linked to it.
Right.
And those that do that well are very critical of one or the other. So I wonder if the I know we don't always love talking about assessment, but one of the things that I found worked well is, for example, if you have a writing across the curriculum rubric, if there is like one line with emerging or emerging, developing, or milestone, or however you go about it,
Sure.
that has different. Sometimes you can even do different, like have a couple of rows and they can choose one where one is more civic learning or
Oh,
civic
okay.
knowledge, and the other one is more civic engagement or community engagement. So you create the place for people to play and have a lot of freedom, but you meet the goals and they can create it and they stop arguing with each other.
Yeah, and it
Or
gives the
towards that
faculty
outcome.
agency. I love that.
Oh.
So, is there maybe a place online I can find an example of that? Or is that just
There's probably, I mean, not exactly what I described. We have something for our civic knowledge and engagement, and I would have to see in our core curriculum. We did use a lot of the value rubrics and modified them, but it's hard if modifying a value rubric can be a bad thing
okay?
because they're so interconnected. If you can't find something, if you can use my name, there's only one person with that name, and Google me. Sorry, and write me, I'll get you a rubric.
Thank you. Thank you for the suggestion. That's awesome. That's awesome.
I'm going to read the question out loud because of the audio, and I'm hoping I'm saying this correctly. So I'm curious about everyone engaged with the Civitas and the civic learning approaches. I'm gonna copy the question over here. Okay, 1 second.
Are you still not hearing me?
Yes, we can hear you now. Okay,
Okay.
sorry.
I'm Prudence Lane from Elon. I was just curious about how everybody approaches or engages the community in all of this learning, because I think that's often they come last, even though they are our labs. We send students out to engage with our communities, and they are not sitting at the table with us. So where are they in your respective institutions and work and frameworks?
So I'd like to respond to this because this is something, and this is going back to what Monjan just said in terms of to Brian's question. I think that's very important. Some of us are the community partners. So I think some of us are like actually doing this kind of work. Like, for example, I sit in a nonprofit board, and I've done this work before, but I think what is really important and to bridge those kind of things is bring the community partners in before, like, so when we're having them go out into the field. So yes, some faculty members are really good with that. But students need to be trained and need to be like, I have the understanding from the community partner. What is the community partner looking for? And understanding the community partner's perspective, their needs, and therefore they need to be co-educators. And then I think this is sometimes also the pushback where faculty members say like, oh, I've been doing this all along. Like, why are you coming and telling me now I need to be doing this differently? But Prudence, I 100% I agree that this needs to be something that I think before people go into the field or do any kind of work, and do continuous check-in with the community partners and really understand if what we're doing is this harming them or is this actually also benefiting them. That would be my take, and I think that's something.
I agree with everything that Bernadette said, and I've noticed that the key portion in the approach with community partners, that key word is reciprocity. It needs to be driven by them and it needs to be reciprocal. There's a lot of thinking of, we're going to go and do this for them. And that's where it goes, right? And it's also where the different groups between civic knowledge and learning and engagement, where those fights arise. It's that issue of being community and community partner driven, having the inquiry or the need come from them, and help have them design with us. And that's where it really rears its head, their role in it.
I'm going to read out Greg Moore's question. If an institution is just getting started, is this initiative best launched at one particular college or department, for example, political science, public administration, or more interdepartmental across academic schools?
So I think there's both in my experience. I remember right before COVID, I was at the AACNU's Civic Prompts in the Major conference in Washington, D.C., and I was doing that for a revision of the International Studies program at Muhlenberg. But so I think it can be done at those smaller departmental levels too. I think that's part of the emphasis, but it's also most of our colleges actually have implicit goals around this in their missions. And so it's ways of trying to sort of I think make that more explicit and probably easier if you have departments though to be able to sort of if we're just beginning initiatives.
I think so from a logistical perspective, obviously it's easier if you start from a smaller level, but what I haven't observed is that when you start with one department, it becomes like, oh, that's what they do. And then like, for example, another field or another like division may say like, that's not our thing. We don't do this, because it becomes entrenched into the knowledge, into the different courses, that's not part of like what the STEM fields do. It's only something with social sciences. So this is what you do. And I think it's really difficult sometimes to basically go back and said like, no, wait a minute, this is how it started, but we all could be participating in that.
Mm-hmm. And I've found that some of the strong drivers in the area are one, student voice. when you have feedback or survey results from students where they ask for more, usually that's the thing that brings everybody together, because everybody wants to respond to the students, and our students very often want to be engaged. They want to know more. And they express it in terms of, I want my course to be relevant. You know, they're not using some of our terminology, but they want it to mean something for their lives in a tangible, right away, you know, direct way. So I think that's a part of it. The other part in your question is, I mean, a lot of it depends on the school, the nature of the faculty and the departments and your resources. But another strong motivator, and I think Brian, you said that, and Kelly, you did it too, is faculty community and collaboration. If faculty can learn from each other, if they can collaborate, if they can, you know, we're not in this work for the tremendously high salaries. We have purpose. We're here for a purpose, and we like community and learning, and sometimes being recognized for what we're bringing to the table, for what we can do well. So if those things are addressed and foregrounded, it becomes possible to build things, because that's a complete gain rather than something causing a loss or something going away.
Greg and Bernadette, I hear the worry about department lock-in, but I'm thinking that in the case of my college, there was more of something like a positive contagion when the cool kids department, was environmental studies here, did a lot of civic engagement. Other departments with some envy said, well, maybe we could do that too. And it did spread out a little bit. So in happy circumstances, it can go that way.
So there was one more question we could also consider. Okay, I'm going to copy it first. So when we think about what you want to accomplish, or the big picture question, where might there be some low-hanging fruit to move this inclusive vision forward? So we've heard about the micro, I'm sorry. So end of the day, the micro credentials. What are other things that maybe an easy start or something that could be create momentum? Maybe you're even picking up on what Kelly said, like the cool kids, other people maybe then also wanting to be joining this.
Yeah, so I don't know if it's low-hanging fruit, but coming out of the pandemic, there's definitely a transformation of both the student body and of the faculty. And there's a radical difference in the way one teaches courses that are focused around this. I was at Elon for the mentoring conference this summer and as well. And I was thinking, when we had a presentation talking about types of civic learning and engagement during one of the lunches, I was at a table, that there's a pedagogy of mentorship rather than a pedagogy that's dependent upon learning the content that's involved here. So there's a rejuvenation that can take place, and it helps to address also some of the long lingering, to me, stresses on faculty life and well-being. And so I'd love to be able to offer everybody $2,000 to do faculty development things, but it feels like even without that there are non-pecuniary benefits to engaging faculty in this kind of thing, especially when, you know, it can counter some of the frustration that I think is universally that I see out there about the decline in students' reading skills, or, you know, increases in student apathy. And so I think it counters these kinds of things in positive ways. And so one way of framing these initiatives is that they're positive ways to address what seem to be some of the bigger concerns that we see out there. But.
I'm not sure who said it earlier about faculty and staff needing to model this work. But one of the questions I always ask candidates and my colleagues is, how can you demonstrate your proximity to what you teach? And how can you make it relevant to what's happening in the community? So for example, I teach literature, criminal justice, writing, study abroad, and I can't think of a class where there isn't some kind of engagement or community immersion or learning, but often the content and knowledge making I try to also place on the students' doorsteps because we live in an age, an information age, and they have the same kind of access, but how to distill and critically think and analyze that information are skills that we're all learning even in this AI revolution. So yes, I agree that communities of practice and professional development, those are great, but it all starts with us as well. So what are we doing? What boards are we sitting on in the community? How are we taking our expertise and knowledge into the areas that really need it? For us at Elon, it's K through 12, 16 education and access. I think we're doing all this work. We should be fully participatory institution, but the areas where we still need development and growth is in our second and third year experiences. So great first year work we do, great capstone work we do for our seniors, but it's that middle of the road group.
I feel like I should put my last question in the chat one more time because I know that there was a hope to get some of the information in writing or it to be synthesized for next week and shared out with participants in the different sessions. So it's the one action that you tend to take in relation to expanding civic learning and democracy engagement at your institution. So it feels to me that a lot of that is in the chat already and information that you've shared.
Yeah, Brian, Muhlenberg, Brian, I see what you posted in the chat. I'm really interested to read that after the session. Thank you.
Just know that it's my first draft after the first Clyde, after the first one of these webinars, but I already have a lot of feedback on it that seeks modification. Some in the community, Office of Community Engagement want to change some of the hierarchical language around leadership skills, and some folks in my department think that there's too much of an artificial split between the two skills courses and the one engage courses, so that'll probably move and morph a little bit. There's a lot of questions about the difference between civic engagement and democratic engagement, and whether or not we really want to be promoting democratic engagement at this moment rather than broadly civic. So there's a lot of debates among the group of faculty that are participating in refining that. But since that document is a mess of comments, I gave you the original one, a copy of the original. But
So I don't know if the breakout rooms are going to automatically disappear. But we also want to remind you that the final plenary starts at 5:10 Eastern time. I don't know if everyone is at Eastern time, but it's supposed to start at 10. Okay, so now we're just we have a couple minutes. Okay, it's very hard. Okay, I'm just trying to. I also I want to come back to the comment from Gloria to thinking about students being co-facilitators. I think there is a lot of, especially what Brian said, coming out of the pandemic, or rethinking about who is the educator, just same way how we think about community partners, how do we think about like who has knowledge and brings knowledge to the table? Bringing in students, and Marjorie, you just talked about this too, having like in terms of like one student's reflection and one student's voice. I think there's a lot of things we can be learning from students and community members. So Gloria, thank you for sharing that, and Prudence for reminding us of the essential role of the community partners. Maybe we have like 2 or 3 minutes left. Maybe there is an opportunity for someone to share any hurdles that you have successfully overcome. We can always talk about how difficult hurdles are, but in implementing this, I appreciate like talking about that money is not always a motivator, that other things can be motivating. So if you have found other like magic wands that can solve some of the issues that we're encountering, I would be grateful if you could share them.
I don't have magic wands, but I wish that sometimes what I said would penetrate to other folks. Like the very first time I did a Scholars at Risk seminar, I didn't know what effect it was having. But in the final reflection piece, I was astounded by how meaningful an experience it was for students, and how over and over they commented on how unusual it was to be in a course that was really geared towards some kind of global engagement. And like it was an empowering experience for them. It changed my teaching on it. And so it feels like there's a real possibility for renewing and changing what people do. But I don't know how to get the stories of the way in which students have that impact to penetrate to other colleagues who hear this idea as like one more change after 5 or 6 years of constant change and imposition. So I think that's a challenge that I need to.
Thank you, Brian, for sharing that. Anyone else who wants to share something? I mean, we appreciate you coming to this panel. I mean, Kelly, you get to wrap it up. You started us, and so I'll let you wrap it up.
I'll join you in thanking everyone. I've written down some really great ideas. I look forward to reading more of what Brian wrote up, and I wish you success. I think I do believe in the contagion of good ideas. So I hope at our home institutions we go back and talk to some colleagues and get something rolling. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you for being here.